Alright, here we go. So let me preface this video by saying that I'm usually quite a shy bloke. I don't normally do videos, but someone asked how I've achieved this, right? So this is what we were working with beforehand. As you can see, the slingshot is bent round from one piece of steel, but it comes up to a bit of a point here, and there's quite a harsh edge. Now we all know stretched rubber does not do well with edges, and after my first band set on this slingshot, I realized that this was not a tenable situation. So I came up with a fix on the spot because my band had snapped, but only one. So I had triple bands on this, on each side. There were three. One of them broke, so I had, 5 bands plus a broken band. So I decided improvising using the materials at hand was a good idea, and I came to quite a workable solution, which is to take one of your regular bands as you would have them. In my case, these are 1 inch across, 6 inch long bands. Everyone has a different opinion on what the best setup is. My opinion has always been more rubber means more stored kinetic energy, which means, again, you can drive a heavier projectile at a higher speed. So the first thing to do is to get it through the gap on the fork end and to start going around the actual fork itself. And what you want to be doing is stretching the rubber out somewhat to create some tension, and also so you get the like more mileage out of your rubber, so to speak. And what I've basically done here is gone around the gap on the fork, and because it's all under tension, the rubber tends to hold on to itself quite nicely, and then gone through the fork. There's no real science to this, I just sort of bodged it together on the spot because of the issue that I had at hand. And again, like I said about creating that tension, it helps you to keep it all pinned around the actual frame of the fork itself, so there's no real serious protrusion. So I'm going under the fork again, and then through the fork, and then down below the fork to keep it all taut and properly wrapped. This is really quite tricky to get it under tension. You have to use your digits to pin this stuff quite a lot. Otherwise, being elastic under tension, it's going to want to retract back onto itself, which can be a serious inconvenience to this process. But the general gist is that pointy, edgy gap, we're just trying to eliminate it, and we've already done that. But because I've got so much rubber here, I'm just going to go round it a whole bunch more times. Another key point is you don't really want to be going back over yourself. You want to be taking the rubber around the forks in different directions. Otherwise you're going to end up with folds, which are annoying and will possibly throw your shot off, though they shouldn't by much, since the way that the slingshot obviously works is through tension. The pouch will always retract directly in a straight line somewhere. You just have to figure out where it's sort of shooting to. But once you've got this all wrapped around, you want to keep it under tension. Obviously you can see that these are not symmetrical, so like I said, there's no real precise science to it. As long as that gap is eliminated and your rubber is not in contact with sharp edges, you should be fine. Once you reach the point where you've wrapped the slingshot up, you can take a smaller strip, a narrow strip of your regular band, because rubber has, here we go, rubber or latex, I should say, rubber or latex, either one of those materials has quite a lot of friction against itself, especially when under tension, this is the really awkward part. because if you don't get your first wrap correct, it just springs back on you, and then everything you were holding under tension just pops back around. So here we are, we've got it all wrapped around, and we're just going over the rubber that's on the fork now to stop it from pinging off. This is a method that I saw in another video. I think it was one of Gamekeeper John's videos, which is a really good method of keeping your slingshot bands tied on. Something that's worth noting with this binding method is that TheraBand rubbers and latexes are susceptible to break down in ultraviolet light, or light which contains ultraviolet rays. So something you can do with this is put electrical tape over it just to protect it from the sun. Once you've gone around a number of times, I'll take this back so you can see what I'm doing here. Pop your thumb onto the band that's wrapped around the fork and go over your thumb and round the fork again here. Then you want to pinch it and pop it through so that it's essentially an overhand knot in terms of what it really is in its composition, but because of the properties of elastics, is really awkward. Because of the properties of elastics and stuff, it's now pinned under tension. So the part that was wrapped around your thumb, you pop the loose end or the tag end under it, so that the tension is now keeping that pinned down. And if you were to use electrical tape on this, you would not need to trim that off. Obviously, that's because that would be under the tape. It wouldn't be an issue. The reason I've got a shoe here, this is relevant to the video, believe it or not, is because my shoelaces can be useful for this process. Instead of laying your thumb over the fork, you can lay a loop over the fork, and then you can take your rubber around the loop and up through the loop before pulling the loop down, and that will help you achieve the same effect without crushing your thumb. But that's the basic gist of how I've achieved this. It's a very simple and, some might argue ugly solution, but it does the job. It stops your frame with any sharp edges from destroying your rubber, which, as we all know, TheraBand gold can get expensive pretty quickly if you're going through it at any kind of a rate. So this is just a good workaround. This is also a really good way of adapting a tubular band slingshot, which is exactly what this is. This is a tubular band slingshot. This is a really good way of adapting those to fire with flat bands. And as I explained, all you need to do is you take your flat bands, you fold them in half at the ends, so they're folded over, and you just put those through the loops and down onto the fork, at which point you can use the same method we used here to attach this to the fork. So you take a long piece of narrow TheraBand and you go round and round and round under tension, and it creates a lot of force because obviously cumulatively it squeezes harder and harder. You put one layer over and suppose it's expressing like a joule of force over the previous layer. You add it up each time you wrap around it, which makes this a very, very strong method of binding bands to your slingshot. Anyway, that's quite a long-winded video. I don't normally do videos, but I hope that method helps you out. I won't tell you how to shoot slingshots because that's particularly individual for each person. Some people like to do it instinctively. Some people like to do it sideways or vertical, whatever works for you. Anyway, best of luck with your slingshotting, and get out there and practice.